This presentation will discuss basic MLA formatting, how to create and incorporate in-text citations, how to format and cite a long quotation, and how to create a hanging indent. In addition, this presentation will also introduce and define the elements of the MLA pattern of citations and how to build works cited citations in MLA. So let's begin with basic MLA formatting. An MLA formatted paper will be typed using Times New Roman font or a similar style such as Arial, and the font size should be size 12. In addition, the text should be double-spaced and the paper should be formatted to include 1-inch margins on all sides. And each page will also have a header at the top of the page that includes the writer's last name and page number. And unlike other citation styles, an MLA formatted paper does not have a title page. Instead, MLA style has a few other formatting elements, and we will begin with the format of the first page. Here's an example of a header. It will include the page number and the student's last name in the top right-hand corner of each page. In addition, the first page will have a heading that will include the student's last name, the instructor's name, the course information, and the work's due date, written in day, month, year format. Lastly, the next line will have the title of the work, and the title should be centered. The body of the text begins on the next line following the title. Each paragraph should be indented to indicate a new paragraph, and after the body of the text, the writer will need to include a list of resources. This is called a works cited page, and it will be located on a separate page from the body of the paper. In this section, we will discuss common in-text parenthetical citations, commonly referred to as in-text citations, and show examples of 3: citations with one author, citations when the author is introduced in the sentence, and website citations without an author or location. The basic MLA in-text citation is a source with one author. In the parentheses, include the author's last name and the page number. Do not place a comma between the author and the page number. If a source has 2 authors, include both authors' last names in the in-text citation using the word "and" in between the authors' surnames. If a source has 3 or more authors, include the last name of the author who is listed first, then include the abbreviation "et al., which will signal to the reader that the text is written by multiple people. Sometimes a sentence will include information from a series of pages within a source. When this occurs, indicate the page range with a hyphen between the first and last page number. In addition, rhetorically, it may make sense to introduce the author or authors in the sentence before including the borrowed information. When this occurs, only place the location of the borrowed information in the parenthetical citation. Let's take a look at a couple of examples of in-text citations. Here's an example of a basic MLA in-text citation of a source with one author. Notice that the punctuation comes after the parenthetical citation. In this example, our authors, Murphin and Ray, are introduced in the sentence, so only the location is included in the parentheses. There are a few other common MLA in-text citations. When citing poetry, for example, include the author's last name and the line number or line range of the quote. When citing an internet source that has an author, include the author's name, but unless the source is a PDF file, do not include a location. Sometimes an internet source does not have an author listed. When this occurs, use a shortened version of the title, typically the first 1 to 3 words of the title, in the in-text citation. For example, if the borrowed information is from a web page article entitled "Cooking Ethnic Foods," the in-text citation may only use the word "cooking" to identify the source. Lastly, an in-text citation for a visual or audio media source will not only include the name of the work, but will also include a timestamp that will show the reader where in the work the borrowed information occurred. Sometimes, when writing an academic paper, you may need to include an extensive quotation to emphasize the validity of your thesis. This style of quotation is called a long quotation. So what are long quotations? MLA long quotations are direct quotes that consist of 4 lines or more of prose, or 3 lines or more of verse. To format long quotations, each line of the quote should be indented 1/2 inch from the margin and remain double-spaced. There should be no indentation as there usually would be when you begin a new paragraph. In addition, there should be no quotation marks. By indenting the quote, you are signaling to your reader that the information is quoted from another source. And lastly, the parenthetical citation is placed at the end of the long quote after the final punctuation. If the author is stated in the text when introducing the quote, you place the page number in parentheses after the final punctuation mark. Here's an example of a long quote. Notice that the length of the quote is more than 4 lines. Also notice how the quote is introduced in the paragraph, but the quote begins on the next line and does not directly follow the quote's introduction. The entire quote is also indented 1/2 inch from the margin to show readers that all the information is borrowed from a source. By indenting the quote, there's no need to add quotation marks. And lastly, unlike short quotes, with long quotes, the end punctuation will precede the parenthetical citation. The purpose of the Works Cited page is to give credit to the scholars and writers whose ideas were borrowed throughout the paper, as well as to provide a way to locate the original sources. In terms of formatting, cited information must be indented after the first line of each source. This is called a hanging indent. Let's take a look at how to create a hanging indent in Microsoft Word products. Click on the paragraph ribbon, and the drop-down box under Special, select Hanging, and under By, make sure it's a 0.5, and then click OK. You can create a hanging indent in Google Docs and in Microsoft Word for Apple products as well. Please check out our handouts on formatting academic papers in Google Docs and formatting MLA in Microsoft Word for Apple products. MLA has introduced a universal guideline for creating citations that can be applied to any type of source. This guideline includes 9 core elements that, if presented, should be included in the citation, and a consistent pattern for which these elements should be arranged in the citation. So let's take a look at the pattern. This graphic illustrates the MLA pattern and includes each element in the order it should appear within the citation. In addition, notice the punctuation after the element. For example, there is a period after author and a comma after title of the container. These are the punctuation marks that should follow these elements when creating a citation. All sources will be cited following this pattern. However, not every source will have every element. When citing a source that is missing an element, simply omit it and move on to the next. For example, if a source you're citing does not have an author, simply begin the citation with the source's title. The first element of the pattern is the author or authors of the source, and there are 3 ways to list the author or authors in the citation. If the source only has one author, list the last name of the author first, then include a comma, and list the author's first name, and the element with a period. Here's an example. The author's last name, in this case Jones, is listed first, and there's a comma separating the last name from the author's first name. Lastly, a period is placed after the author's name. When a source has 2 authors, the first author will be listed in the same manner as the previous example, except a comma will be placed after the first author's first name. Then the word "and" will follow, and the second author's name will be listed first name and then last name. A period will follow the second author's last name. In this example, we have Jones, Bob, another comma, the word "and," the second author's name, Patty Smith, written first name, last name, and a period at the end of the element. Sometimes a source will have 3 or more authors. When this occurs, only list the first author in the same manner as a source with 1 author, last name, comma, first name. Place a comma after the first name and add et al. With a period at the end. The abbreviation et al. Will indicate to the reader that there are multiple authors of the source. The next element is the title of the source. Examples of this element include a web page, an article from a journal or a newspaper, a song, or a novel. In most instances, the source title will be placed in quotation marks. However, this is not always the case. If the source is cited in its entirety, then it must be italicized. For example, if the source is a novel that is analyzed in a literary analysis, then the novel will be italicized. In addition, if the source has a title and a subtitle, separate them with a colon. In this example, Senselessness and Insensibility is the title, and Women's Rights in the 1700s is the subtitle, so a colon is placed between them. The 8th edition of MLA introduces the concept of a container. A container is a larger work that holds a smaller source, for example, a website where a web page is found, a journal that published an article, a database that holds a journal article, an album that includes a song, or a book that contains a poem or a short story. These are all examples of containers that would be included in an MLA Works Cited citation. Containers are always italicized and will be followed by a comma. Also, it is important to note that a source may have more than one container, and this will be discussed later in this presentation. After the container, list the names of those who contributed to the source's material. Precede the contributor's name by stating the contribution and follow the contributor's name with a comma. Common contributors include editors, translators, the person who uploaded content onto the internet, the author of a book's introduction, or the author of a book's foreword. The next element to include is the version of the source followed by a comma. Some sources have been published or distributed in more than one form. You should list the version of the source that you used in your paper. Examples of versions for printed sources include a second edition of a textbook, a revised edition of a text, or an abridged version of a novel. For non-print sources, examples include the extended edition or the director's cut of a film, or an anniversary edition of a classic album. After the version, include the number. Some texts are published in a sequence, and the order of the sequence is noted with numbers or letters that are typically referred to as a volume or issue number. If a source includes this information, then it should be included in the citation, followed by a comma. Some examples include a book published in a series. These are typically published in volumes, and in the citation you should abbreviate volume but do not capitalize it, and list the number after the abbreviation. A comic book, however, may only have an issue number. To cite the number, abbreviate the word number to the letters NO and place the number after the abbreviation. Journals often include both a volume and an issue number. When a source has both numbers, cite the volume number first, add a comma, and then cite the issue number. Lastly, when citing television episodes, include the season number and the episode number in the citation, but do not abbreviate the words season or episode. Next, include the organization responsible for producing the source. For books, this is the publisher. The publisher information is typically found on the title page or the copyright page of the text. For films and television series, cite the company with primary responsibility for the production and distribution of the work. This information is typically found in the opening credits of the film or episode. For websites, the publisher information is usually found near the bottom of the web page or in the website's home page. Follow the publisher information with a comma. After the publisher, include the publication date. For sources that include precise dates of publication, include the information in day, month, year format. For sources without a precise date, include the information given. For example, if the publication date information only includes a month in a year or a season in a year, include that information noting the year of publication last. If a source, however, lists more than one publication date, only cite the date that is most relevant to your paper. The last element of the pattern is the location of the source. This element tells the reader precisely where you obtained the borrowed information. The final element will be punctuated with a period. For books, the location may include a page number or a page range. For internet sources, the location may include the URL. However, do not include the HTTP or HTTPS and backslashes that precede the URL. Or it may include the Digital Object Identifier or DOI. Journal articles from a database often provide a DOI number. For music and visual media, such as a song, a television episode, or a special film edition, include the disc number to show the location. And finally, for pieces of art, note the physical location of the piece, such as a museum or an art gallery. Now that we know the pattern and core elements, we can use them to build citations. Because the pattern can be used with any source, there are only 3 types of works cited citations. The first is a self-containing source. This is a source that is complete in itself. Some examples include a novel, a film, or an entire website. The next source type is a source within a container. This type of source could be a chapter in a book, a song on an album, or an article in a journal or newspaper. The last type is a source within a container within a container. As mentioned earlier, some sources have more than one container. These sources include a song on an album accessed from a third party such as Spotify, an article in a journal accessed through a database, or a movie clip or television episode published on YouTube. Let's take a look at an example of each of these source types. Here's the pattern for a self-containing source. First, we have the author or authors, then we have the title of the source. Notice that the title is italicized and there's a period after the source's title. That is because the entire source is being cited and not a smaller piece from within it. Next, we will list the other contributors, then the version, the number, the publisher, the publication date, and finally the location. A self-containing source will look like this in a Works Cited page. The source's title is italicized, which will indicate to the reader that the entire source is being cited. Also notice that the example is missing some elements. That's okay. Remember, when a source does not have an element, skip it and move on to the next one in the pattern. When citing a source within a container, begin with the author or authors, then list the title of the source in quotation marks and place a period after the source's title. Next, list the title of the container and italicize it, and include any other contributors, the version, the number, the publisher, the publication date, and location. On this Works Cited page, we have 3 examples of a source within a container. The source of the first 2 are sections of a book and the containers are italicized. This example is from an internet source. Remember, when including a URL, do not include the HTTP or the HTTPS. The final source type is a source within 2 containers. This citation begins like the source within a container with the author or authors, the title of the source, the container, contributors, and so on, with a period following the first location. If the source has a second container, after the first location, cite the second container by beginning the pattern again at the container element, and then follow the pattern in the same manner, ending with the location of the second container. Here is an example of a source with 2 containers. Notice that the source begins in the same manner as the previous type. We begin with the authors, then we have the title of the source in quotation marks, Plato and Simulacrum. The MIT Press is the first container, and it is followed by a volume number, a publication date, and a page range marking the location of the article, Plato and Simulacrum, within the MIT Press journal. The page range is followed first by a period. Then, the database where the source was found is stated and italicized, and a digital object identifier, or DOI, is included. The DOI is the location of the article within the second container, which is in this example, the database JSTOR.